in 1963, Martin Luther King wrote a letter from a jail in Alabama. And he was kind of addressing a big audience when he wrote this letter. And sometimes we kind of look back and give a particular narrative to certain struggles. And we assume that the battle against segregation in the States was against, KKK people and people who put hoods on their head and burning crosses on the lawn, that kind of stuff. Well, that, of course, was a factor. But who was the target of Martin Luther King's anger or opposition in this letter from the Birmingham jail? It was what he called white moderates, who were saying to the civil rights movement, you're creating a lot of tension here, do you think you should go slower, this kind of thing. And he said, who are you to tell the oppressed people what pace they should advance their resistance movement for equality? So the charge of so-called creating tension on campus is a false charge. You're not creating tension on campus, you're pointing to the tension that already exists and suggesting the creative solutions to getting rid of the tension in Palestine as well.
A lot of times when the idea of BDS is suggested, a lot of people argue that instead of divesting from Israel, we should invest in Palestine instead. I was wondering which method you thought would be more effective.
Yeah, okay, well, I mean, that idea is almost directly taken out of instructions sent to J Street people on campus, right? The idea that you need to so-called invest rather than divest. Of course, on one level, there are Palestinians who are living under occupation who need material support. I mean, in the UK, I don't know what it's like here, you can buy Palestinian olive oil, for example. There was a really good show on TV about it recently on mainstream TV, which is good. So in that sense, you're investing in the Palestinian economy by buying the products, all that sort of thing. But of course, it comes back to, if you're looking at Palestinians from a humanitarian perspective, what's creating the poverty? Even people from the IMF and the World Bank, when they do economy reports on the occupied territories, in the way, in the language that they would use, they say, well, there's no hope of a Palestinian economy if you don't remove the conditions of occupation, right? You can't run a successful business when you don't know if your workers are going to arrive on time. Well, Bethlehem area, for example, an area I know particularly well, when the land that's available to the Palestinians is so small, where are you going to build a factory when the land's colonized or restricted for you to use? How are you going to farm your fields when it's the other side of a separation wall? So it's about getting to the roots of the issue. And BDS actually means something positive, right? It's a positive response, it's a proactive response. It's a non-violent response that brings people together from all different backgrounds. The coalitions that represent BDS on campuses and not campuses are varied coalitions of people, Jews, Palestinians, Arabs, people of all religions and none. It's a creative, dynamic response to the conditions on the ground. A response in the face of Israel's impunity, right? It's a response given the fact that Israel's not held to account for its actions, given the fact that there isn't an international enforcement of basic Palestinian rights. It's a non-violent response of civic society to this reality.
Thank you so much for coming, first of all. I really enjoyed your lecture, and I just was blown by all that information. Thank you. And as you must know, a lot of it doesn't go reported, so it's great that we got to hear that today. My question would have to be, I'm sure you've heard about it, that in order to get the moratorium expanded, President Obama, he offered a package to the Netanyahu administration. And a part of that package was that the U.S. would no longer condemn Israel for expanding the settlements if they just put the settlement moratorium in for one more time. And it was just a part that really struck out to me. And I just want to know, since you have visited the area, you have been on the ground, you have seen the facts on the ground. If the U.S., such a key player in the Mideast peace process, if the U.S. backs out of its condemnation from settlements, the international community does it or not. But if the U.S. backs out of it, what would be the effect of that? And I was just hoping. Thank you.
Well, I mean, just a word on the so-called settlement freeze, right, itself, which again was an effort really from the Israeli government, of course, working with the Americans, and to try and keep the peace process, which is on a life support machine, going a little bit further. And again, like I said, when I was there in January, in July again, the settlements were expanding. Because what happened was that limits were approved before the freeze went into effect, that then could be continued to be implemented during the so-called freeze. Now, you start to look at kind of quite farcical positions when it comes to the peace process, right? Where people are negotiating over clear-cut violations of international law and bargaining. Which stolen goods does the thief get to keep, right? I mean, what kind of basis is that for a peace process? Whatever Obama does right now doesn't make much difference to what happens on the ground. Like, it hasn't made much difference since he's been in office, right? Because Israel continues to create these facts on the ground. And Obama, like the presidents before him, is unable to actually, unable to actually apply the pressure that's required. Just to really quickly just give one illustration of the flaw in the peace process and the US's position within that. Every year, the General Assembly votes on a resolution to do with Palestinian self-determination. And every year it's passed by an overwhelming majority. Last year, 2009, 170 countries are voting in favour of this resolution, and it was 5 or 6 countries that voted against, which was Israel, the US, and a few South Pacific islands that are economic dependencies of the states. And I was just reading the minutes of the meeting where they passed this resolution, and the United States representative explained the no vote to self-determination. And the US representative said, of course we support Palestinian rights, but we think that a resolution like this could damage or harm the peace process. So what kind of a peace process is it where a declaration of support for basic right like self-determination could constitute a threat? It's a joke.
On that note, I'd like to close this event, and thank you so much for coming. Mr. White's text again is outside, Israeli Apartheid, A Beginner's Guide, if you'd like to get